They were not born of the same womb, but one carried fire in her heart. In the quiet village of Oren, where the trees whispered secrets older than kings and the sun melted gold across red earth, there lived a nobleman named Abadil. Years ago his first wife had died during childbirth, leaving him with their only daughter, Marali, a girl with skin like polished mahogany and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of forgotten songs. Gentle and thoughtful, she grew beneath the shade of old baobab trees, learning to cook, to read wind patterns and to listen more than speak. Her kindness was not loud, but it lingered like scent on a well-worn scarf. Years passed. Abadil, though respected, was urged by elders to remarry. No man should walk life alone, they said. So he chose Aminata, a widow with a daughter of her own, Esina, a girl whose beauty made even older women glance twice, and whose smile rarely reached her eyes. Where Marali was quiet water, Esina was dry lightning. Her presence turned heads, her words often bit. On the day their lives joined under one roof, Esina stood beside her mother, staring at Marali not with curiosity but calculation. Marali had worn a simple white wrapper and carried a basket of fruits to welcome them. She had smiled, bowed her head respectfully and said, "Welcome to your home." Esina, without blinking, said, "This isn't my home. It's yours. For now." From that day forward, fire crept into every room they shared. Marali, unaware of the full bitterness brewing, continued to treat Esina like a sister, offering her hair beads, sharing her favorite sleeping mat, even covering for her when she was caught sneaking out at night. But Esina measured everything. Her mother whispered in her ear each evening, "Do not let her shine too bright. That light isn't for you." The entire village, nestled between two rivers and guarded by the mountains of Maji, awaited one event above all others: the royal bride selection. Once every 7 years the crown prince chose a bride from among the maidens of the kingdom. Girls were brought to the palace from every corner of the land, but Oren held a proud history. 3 queens had been chosen from its soil. The selection was near. Only months remained. Marali had no ambition for the palace. She loved her village, the wide fields, the laughing children, the way the wind carried the scent of yam stew from house to house. But Esina had stared at the royal crest above her bed since she was 10. She memorized royal customs, learned the names of every prince in the royal lineage, and even practiced her wave before a mirror. When a messenger announced that the prince's entourage would soon arrive to assess the maidens of Oren, the house became a quiet battlefield. Aminata pressed herbs into Esina's bathwater, claiming they would bring out her inner glow. They hired a tailor to stitch imported fabrics into gowns that shimmered like moonlight. Esina refused to eat yam, saying it puffed her cheeks. She drank nothing but crushed hibiscus and goat milk. Marali meanwhile did little. Her father simply said, "If they see you they will see your mother. That will be enough." She wore her mother's old anklet and spent evenings watching the stars. She didn't prepare for royalty, she prepared for peace. But each time Esina caught her laughing in the courtyard or humming to the goats, something inside her clenched. Marali didn't even want the prince, and still the village boys watched her with soft eyes. Still her skin glowed without oils. Still she moved like morning mist, barely there but impossible to ignore. Esina made a promise to herself then, standing by the doorway as Marali brushed her hair in the moonlight. "If only one of us walks into that palace, it will be me." The letter was sealed in gold, but it brought war into their home. It arrived just after sunrise as dew still clung to the leaves and the roosters announced another day. A rider from the palace, draped in the blue and gold sash of royal messengers, dismounted before the home of Abadil. He was met with awe by the neighbors, who peeked through woven fences and clutched their wrappers tighter in reverence. Abadil stepped out, still tying his sash. "You've ridden far, brother. What brings you to a quiet house like mine?" The messenger bowed and produced a scroll bound in red thread and sealed with the golden wax of the royal crest. "By order of the crown prince of Olamba, the noble daughters of this house, Marali, daughter of Abani, and Esina, daughter of Aminata, are summoned to the palace. Both are to be presented for the bride selection ceremony." Gasps escaped from behind walls. Abadil took the scroll with steady hands, but his heart fluttered like a bird caught in a basket. He nodded his thanks and invited the messenger to rest, but the rider was already off to the next village. When he entered the house, scroll in hand, his wives and daughters looked up in unison. Aminata snatched the scroll before he could even speak. Her eyes scanned the lines hungrily, lips moving without sound. Then, her face bloomed into a smile so wide it nearly split her painted cheeks. "They called both girls?" Abadil said, watching her carefully. Aminata's voice was syrupy sweet. Of course. Tradition demands fairness. But it is Esena they will truly see. Marali stepped forward, not in excitement but in quiet curiosity. We're both going? She asked, her tone even. Aminata turned, one eyebrow raised. Did you think they'd forget you entirely, child of a ghost? Abadil cleared his throat, but the tension had already set root. The message, now laid on the table, felt more like a sword than an invitation. That night, preparations began. Esena's excitement knew no bounds. Aminata ordered dyes and fabrics from the market before the sun had fully set. We must outshine every girl there, she declared, circling Esena like a sculptor with her statue. Hair must be threaded with coral. Your skin must glow like oil. Your waist must whisper of royalty. Marali meanwhile remained still. She sat in her corner of the compound, stringing a necklace from old cowrie shells. Her father watched her and finally said, "You will not chase this like the others?" She looked up, eyes soft. "If the prince chooses me, let it be for who I am. Not who I pretend to be." He nodded slowly. Your mother would have said the same. But Aminata and Esena had no room for quiet faith. That evening, just as the moon climbed high, a woman wrapped in green and copper entered through the back gate. Her eyes were sharp, her breath heavy with the scent of pepper leaves and charcoal. "The charm woman," Esena whispered. She was led into the kitchen hut, where shadows clung to the corners and the walls were thick with smoke. A white cloth was spread on the floor. The woman pulled out gourds, stones, and a small bowl of what looked like dried bones. "There are herbs to make the skin glow, powders to sweeten the tongue, and oils to cloud the prince's eyes," she rasped. Aminata nodded eagerly, dropping a bag of coins into her lap. "Make her unforgettable." The charm woman chanted as she worked, tracing symbols on Esena's feet and combing her hair with fingers that felt colder than they should have been. Esena shivered but didn't move. If this was the price of royalty, she would pay it. In the days that followed, the house became a stage of silent battles. Esena practiced her walk before a cracked mirror. Aminata paced, muttering measurements and recipes. Marali quietly washed her old garments, choosing the deep red cloth that once belonged to her mother. Her jewelry was modest, glass beads, worn leather. But when she stood beneath the sun, there was a stillness around her, like the hush before rain. One evening, as Marali passed the kitchen to fetch water, she heard her name. "She doesn't even want the prince," Esena whispered sharply. "Why should she be allowed to go?" Aminata replied, "It doesn't matter. She'll be there. But she won't return." There was a silence that followed, long and heavy. Marali stood in the shadows, a clay pot in her hands, her heart beating against her ribs like a drum. She stepped away quietly, pretending she'd heard nothing. But that night she couldn't sleep. Outside her window, the wind rustled the trees like voices warning her in a language she almost understood. Whispers of betrayal floated in the air, curling into the corners of her room. The storm was coming. And though she didn't know it yet, it would wear her sister's smile. She woke to fire, and the scream never left her throat. The night before the journey, the wind that swept through the village was different. It didn't sing like it usually did. It whispered, low and tense, pressing against windows and curling under doorways. Somewhere a rooster crowed too early. A lizard darted from one mud brick wall to another as if it too sensed something unnatural in the air. In the house of Abadil, the silence was heavy. The house didn't sleep. It only pretended to. Marali lay on her mat in the corner of her room, her breath soft and untroubled. She had no worries, no bitterness, no schemes in her mind. Her braids were loose and scattered around her head like black rivers, and the nightcloth she wore was faded but clean. Next to her pillow lay a folded gown, deep red, stitched by her mother's own hands before she passed. Her anklet clinked faintly as she moved in her sleep. Her dreams were soft, unguarded. She did not know that tonight was the last night her skin would feel like her own. Across the house, in a separate room where the air smelled of fine oils and the floor was padded with animal skins, Esena was wide awake. Her breath came shallow. Her fingers tapped her thighs, over and over again like drums of warning. She sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the small clay bowl in her hands. Inside it, thick black oil shimmered faintly, heated until it hissed earlier in the kitchen fire. Mixed into the oil were spices that burned the tongue, powdered pepper seeds, and a drop of charm herb, meant not to heal but to disfigure. A concoction learned from the very same charm woman they had paid in secret days earlier. Esena's lips were dry. Her heart thudded in her chest, sharp and fast. Her mother's words kept circling in her head. "If she goes with you to that palace, she will ruin everything. The prince will look at her first. Always her first. It didn't matter that Esena wore brighter silks, spoke with confidence, moved like royalty. It didn't matter that charm oils had been rubbed into her skin or that she had fasted for days to narrow her waist. Marali had something else. Something soft but dangerous. A glow that made people turn and stare not because she demanded it, but because she didn't. Esena stood. She walked barefoot through the hallway. The door to her mother's room was closed. Abadil had left earlier for a late-night elder council meeting. The servants had long gone to sleep. The house was silent, waiting. She paused outside Marali's room. Her shadow stretched across the wall like a second self. The bowl in her hands trembled just once. Then she pushed the door open. Inside, Marali's figure lay still beneath the cloth. Her face was turned toward the wall. Her chest rose and fell in peaceful rhythm. There was no fear, no stirring. She was defenseless. Esena stepped forward, the bowl heavy in her hands. "You should have never been born," she whispered, her voice as flat as the ground beneath a stampede. She raised the bowl and threw. The oil splashed across Marali's face, neck, shoulder, and chest in one sizzling rush. It was still warm, too warm, and the pepper burned like a curse. The air was sliced by a scream so raw, so agonized, it could have shattered glass. Marali shot upright, clawing at her face, her body thrashing. The pain was instant and all-consuming. It was not just fire. It was betrayal turned into liquid flame. Her scream rose again. Her skin blistered as if the heat had found a home inside her. She could not see. She could barely breathe. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a sound like an animal in a trap. The noise pulled Aminata from her room. She rushed to the doorway and saw Marali writhing, eyes bulging, cloth soaked in the oil that now hissed on her skin. Esena stood nearby, frozen. Without hesitation, Aminata slammed the door and pulled Esena out. She shoved her toward the courtyard. "Help me carry her," she said through gritted teeth. "Now." Together they dragged the screaming girl, her limbs jerking, her voice a fading moan, out the back door and into the darkness. They passed the goat pen, past the well, to the old storage hut near the back wall of the compound. It was where cobwebs slept undisturbed and rats claimed corners. The door creaked open with a protest, and they dumped Marali inside. Her voice was hoarse now. The blisters on her arms had burst. Her left eye was swelling shut. Her lip bled. She couldn't speak. Could barely move. "She ran away," Aminata hissed. "That's the story." Esena stood silent. She lit a lamp too close to her mat, panicked and fled into the forest. "It happens. Let the elders pity her. Let them think she lost her mind in shame. We are going to the palace tomorrow. You are the only daughter." Esena nodded, but slowly. She didn't speak. They locked the door. Marali lay in the dark, her breath shallow, every inch of her body burning. She reached for her face but stopped. The skin felt wrong. Her mouth barely opened. There was no water, no voice, no hope. Only pain. And the smell of scorched flesh. The sky turned pale. By dawn, the cart from the palace arrived in the village center. Girls in bright colors climbed in, laughing, hopeful, hearts pounding. Esena walked with confidence. Her mother adjusted her necklace, whispered final instructions. No one asked where Marali was. No one dared. Back in the hut, the door creaked softly. A hand reached through the shadows. Old and bony, with wrists wrapped in faded cloth. The old servant woman, Nuru, entered quietly. Her eyes, though milky, had seen more than anyone knew. She knelt by Marali's body and touched her gently, whispering prayers too old for memory. That night, beneath a shelter of leaves far from the village, Nuru ground herbs with trembling hands. Forest salves. Burn roots. Spirit ointments. Marali didn't speak. But her eyes opened. And they did not close again. The forest does not forget the cries of the innocent. For 3 days and 3 nights, the old servant Nuru guided Marali through the dense thickets of the forest, moving through hidden paths only the oldest of tongues still named. Marali, broken and blistered, barely knew where she was. Her body moved because Nuru moved it. Her eyes saw only through a blur of pain. The scent of charred skin still clung to her like smoke. Her face pulsed with heat, and her lips, split and peeling, had not formed words since the scream that had torn through her throat. But the forest remembered. It welcomed her, not with softness but with silence. It opened slowly as if weighing her pain, judging whether it was true. They passed trees with bark like wrinkled hands and vines that hissed when brushed too roughly. Strange birds watched from above, their heads tilting in rhythm with Marali's breathing. Somewhere deeper in the undergrowth something howled, long and low, not in hunger but in mourning. Nuru said little as they walked. She only whispered prayers beneath her breath, her voice barely audible. She didn't explain where they were going, only that it was far from the eyes of men, and closer to the heart of truth. By the fourth day they reached the edge of the Forbidden Grove, a place many villagers only spoke of during storms or funerals. It was said that once long ago spirits walked freely there. That mothers who had lost children could enter and return with whispers in their ears. That liars who stepped into its roots never came back. But Nuru did not hesitate. She parted the vines like curtains and led Marali inside. At the center of the grove stood a hut made of ashwood and dried river reed, roofed with feathers and bones. Smoke curled from its chimney, thick and blue, smelling not of firewood but of memory. A woman waited outside, seated on a stool carved from a single stone. Her skin was the deep black of fertile earth, and her eyes were the color of lightning before a storm. Her hair was threaded with green beads, and her hands rested on her knees, still as the roots around her. "She is burned," Nuru said, her voice trembling now. "But not just in body." The woman rose. Her feet made no sound. She walked toward Marali and touched her face with one finger, so lightly it might have been air. Marali did not flinch. She couldn't. Her pain was too large to react. The healer studied her for a long time. Then she nodded. "She may enter." Inside the hut time bent. For 7 days, Marali lay wrapped in layers of bark and soaked leaves. The healer sang over her, songs with no words, only hums that vibrated through her skin and bones. Smoke was blown across her cheeks and ashes were rubbed into her feet. Her blisters were sliced open with bone needles, and the pus was poured into gourds and buried beneath the hut. Every morning the healer whispered into her ear, "You are not ruined. You are remembered." By the end of the 7th day Marali sat up. Her face remained scarred, tight in some places, discolored in others. Her left eye would never fully open again. Her cheek bore a mark like the edge of a dried river. But something else had changed. Her gaze was heavier now. Her breath came slower, as if she listened to things others could not hear. She didn't cry. She didn't ask why. She only sat. "Stand," the healer said on the 8th morning. Marali did. She stood tall. Her spine straightened. Her feet found balance. Her fingers no longer trembled. Her skin, though changed, glowed with something that had nothing to do with oils or sun. It was the kind of glow that came from surviving something meant to destroy you. The healer brought her a long veil, woven from bark silk and smoke fiber, soft yet strong. It covered her from head to chest, leaving only the lower part of her face visible. It was not meant to hide her, it was meant to honor what she had walked through. "You must not hide from the eyes of fate," the healer said. "Let them see you. Let them wonder. Let them remember." Marali took the veil and nodded once. Before she left, the healer pressed a small stone into her palm, clear and cold, with a strange humming inside it. "When the time comes, break it." Marali didn't ask what would happen when she did. She simply tied it around her wrist with a piece of red string. Nuru walked beside her again, guiding her back to the edge of the forest, but this time Marali did not need to be held. Her steps were slow, steady. Her gait had changed. She no longer walked like someone waiting for permission to exist. She walked like someone who had returned from death and chose to stay. By the time the path turned toward the palace road, Marali's heart beat with purpose. Her face burned when the sun hit it, but she did not shield herself. She kept the veil in place, but she did not bend her head. The other girls had gone in carts, laughing and painted. She would walk. Let the palace see her as she was, flawed, forgotten, and risen. Let the prince see the girl who had once been burned in her sleep, and still came. He looked at Esena, then asked, "Is this all you've brought me?" The palace of Alamba stood like a sun-washed mountain, white stone and gold-tipped towers gleaming under a cloudless sky. Its gates were carved with stories older than kings, and its guards stood so still they seemed sculpted from bronze. Trumpets blared when the bridal caravan from the village of Oran arrived, and the cobbled courtyard buzzed with activity. Esena stepped from the royal cart like a vision, draped in sapphire and gold, her hair a high crown of twisted braids looped through with coral rings. Her mother had spent every coin she'd saved to ensure Esena glowed like a goddess. And she did. Her skin shone from days of charm oils, her waist cinched in a velvet corset that narrowed her figure into lines sculpted by envy and ambition. The other girls from surrounding villages watched her with open awe. Their bracelets clinked softly as they stepped aside to let her pass. Inside the great hall, where the bridal presentation would be held, Esena curtsied before the queen and king, her smile measured and graceful. She knew when to bow her head, when to flash her eyes. She spoke only when spoken to, but when she did, her voice was honeyed and bright. The court ladies whispered behind feathered fans. The queen raised an eyebrow, impressed. Even the chief minister took note. But the prince remained still. He sat on the upper dais beside his parents, dressed in white and gold, the royal serpent insignia embroidered across his chest. His hair was braided in ceremonial knots, and his eyes, dark as rain clouds, drifted as though he searched for something only he could see. He clapped politely when Esena danced. He smiled once, briefly, when she offered a clever proverb. But his heart was far away. 4 weeks now he had been haunted by dreams. Each night he closed his eyes and found himself standing by the great river near the palace, alone. The water rippled calmly. The sky was always pink. And there, across the bank, stood a veiled woman, unmoving. She never spoke. Her face was hidden, but her presence shook him. She would raise her hand slowly, palm out, and he would wake, heart pounding. He had asked the palace diviner what it meant. "She is not a danger," the diviner said. "But she carries fire. And you must choose whether it burns you or frees you." So now, as Esena danced for the court and offered sweet words to the queen, the prince watched her as one might watch a painting, beautiful but unmoving. Something in him itched. Something in him waited. Meanwhile, down the hill behind the palace's main gates, Marali entered through the servants' path. She wore no jewels, no paint. Only a deep crimson wrapper and a veil of ash gray that hung just below her scarred chin. The guards did not stop her. Nuru, who had spoken to the old stableman earlier that morning, had made quiet arrangements. An orphan girl in need of work was no threat. Marali walked without speaking. She moved like dusk, unnoticed, soft but impossible to ignore when seen. The palace grounds were vast, its gardens blooming with color and scent, but Marali kept her gaze low. She had no interest in wandering, only in seeing. That night, the ceremonial dance was held under the great canopy of stars. Firelight bathed the courtyard in orange and gold. Maidens from every corner of the kingdom danced barefoot on white stone, their bangles shimmering, their eyes locked on the prince. Esena stood at the center, dressed in royal blue, her wrists lined with golden cuffs, her lips curved in practiced confidence. She had saved her best dance for this moment. Every turn, every sway of her hip, was deliberate. She caught the queen's smile. She caught murmurs from ministers. She saw one court elder nod slowly. She saw victory. And yet, the prince's gaze had drifted. He was no longer watching her. He had turned, ever so slightly, toward the far side of the courtyard. Toward the shadows near the columns where a single girl stood still as a statue. The air changed. The drumbeat seemed to slow. His heart kicked in his chest. There she was. The veil. The stillness. The exact tilt of the head from his dreams. He rose slowly. Esena faltered mid-turn, confused by the prince leaving his seat before her final spin. The guests turned, watching as he descended the steps, eyes locked on the veiled girl by the wall. Marali stood silent. Her hands were clasped before her. Her breath shallow. She had not planned to be seen. She only wanted to watch. But now here he was, approaching. He stopped 2 paces from her. "You," he said, barely louder than a whisper. "From the dream." Marali's lips parted, but no words came. He took another step. His voice was low, full of wonder. "Who are you?" Before she could answer, a hand grabbed his sleeve. "Esena." Her face was tight with disbelief. "Your Highness," she said quickly. "I am Esena of Oren. I was presenting." He gently removed her hand. "I saw your dance," he said kindly. "And you were dazzling." He turned back to the veiled girl. "But I've seen her, before I ever opened my eyes." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The queen leaned forward. The court ministers shifted in their seats. Esena stood frozen, her smile faltering. Her mother, at the far edge of the pavilion, felt her heart sink. The prince stepped closer to Marali again. "You don't need to speak," he said softly. "I just needed to know you were real." Marali looked at him, one eye still swollen, her skin tight with old burns, but her posture calm. And for the first time in days she spoke. "I am." He smiled, and the torches seemed to flicker all at once. The dream had stepped into the waking world. And Esena, dressed in perfection, found herself outside the circle she had bled to be inside. He lifted her veil and did not flinch. The banquet hall shimmered with light from 100 oil lamps. Musicians strummed soft rhythms in the background as platters of roasted lamb, honeyed yams, and spiced millet were brought to long wooden tables draped in royal cloth. The palace was celebrating, for the time had come. The crown prince would announce his bride. Noblemen and visiting chiefs filled the great hall, their wives decked in layers of gold and feathered headdresses. At the high table sat the king and queen, their expressions unreadable, their goblets untouched. But in one corner of the room, dressed in peacock blue with sapphires strung across her hairline, Esena sat tall and beaming, every inch the princess she believed herself to be. Her mother, Aminata, sat nearby, her posture regal, her eyes sharp and glinting. She had already imagined her daughter's coronation. She could already hear the villagers chanting her name with awe. As far as she was concerned, everything had gone according to plan. Marali was gone, forgotten, swallowed by whatever wilderness she had run into. And now Esena would rise. The prince sat silently for most of the banquet, offering polite nods and rare smiles as dancers moved across the marble floor and cups were refilled. But his thoughts were far from the celebration. He was thinking of the veiled girl, Marali, whose eyes had met his the night before like two mirrors reflecting something ancient. Her voice still echoed in his mind, "I am." At last, a court herald struck his staff against the floor, and all noise faded into silence. His Royal Highness Crown Prince Olamide shall now name his chosen bride. All eyes turned to the prince as he rose from his chair. He glanced briefly at the king, who gave a small nod, and then at the queen, whose eyes were fixed on him with quiet intensity. Esena straightened her shoulders and raised her chin. She smoothed her gown and folded her hands elegantly atop her lap. The prince began to walk forward. He passed the table of high priests. He passed the daughters of noble houses. He passed Esena. A gasp fluttered through the room. Esena turned her head sharply, confusion flashing in her eyes. She looked to her mother, who frowned deeply, shifting in her seat. The prince's steps did not slow. At the far end of the room, near a pillar where the shadows softened the torchlight, stood a veiled figure in red and gray. Marali. She did not sit at a royal table. She had not eaten. No one had offered her wine or asked her name. But there she was, silent and upright, like an accusation carved from wood. The prince stopped before her. His voice when it came was soft. "I see you." He reached up and slowly lifted her veil. Gasps exploded around the hall. Her face, though partially healed, was unmistakably scarred. One eye bore the red outline of flame. Her cheeks shimmered with old burned tissue. Her lips, slightly uneven, curled not in shame but in calm acceptance. She looked at the prince without fear. And he did not flinch. Instead he smiled. He bowed his head. He knelt before her. "I choose you," he said clearly, "because truth leaves scars." He turned slightly, eyes settling on Esena. But so does beauty built on lies. The court was stunned into silence. Esena's mouth opened, but no sound came. She looked around, waiting for someone to intervene, someone to laugh and call it a test. But no one did. She stood slowly, her hands trembling. Aminata rose beside her, face turning red with fury. "This is madness." Aminata cried out. "That girl, she's not even one of the chosen. She's no daughter of Orin. She doesn't belong here." The queen's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Who is she then?" Abadil, seated near the king, stood. His voice trembled as he answered. "She is Marali, my daughter. Born of my first wife, Abani." Another ripple of murmurs. The king leaned forward. Why was her name not included among the selected maidens brought before us? Before anyone else could speak, a small hunched figure emerged from behind a marble column, wrapped in faded cloth, her back bent like a bow. Nero. She moved to the center of the hall, and all eyes turned toward her. Despite her humble appearance, her presence stilled the air. "I will tell you why," she said in a voice stronger than anyone expected. "Because they tried to erase her." Aminata paled. "This girl," Nuru said, pointing at Esena, "and her mother burned Marali's face with hot oil the night before the journey. They dragged her from her room like a thief and locked her in the storage hut, hoping she'd die in silence." Gasps rose again, louder now. Court ladies covered their mouths. The high priest shook his head slowly. Esena stepped forward, panicked. "She's lying. She's just a servant." "Ask to see the hut," Nuru said. "Ask to see the oil bowl they tried to wash. Ask your guards if any saw me leave the village with her in my arms. Or better yet, ask Marali." Everyone turned. The girl in red stood still, her gaze locked on Esena. "I heard you whisper it," she said calmly. "She won't return. I woke to fire and your hands dragging me into the dark." Esena shook her head wildly. No, I never." Aminata grabbed her daughter's arm. "Say nothing more." But it was too late. The queen stood. Her voice rang clear and sharp. "Guards, seize them." Esina cried out as two royal guards moved forward. Aminata tried to back away, but another guard blocked her path. The court erupted into whispers and shocked murmurs. The king raised a hand and silence returned. The prince turned to his parents. "I saw her in my dreams. I saw her before I even knew she existed. And when I met her, my heart remembered her." He looked at Marali again, his voice softer now. "Let me walk beside someone who has faced fire and still stands." The king studied Marali's face. He saw the pain. He saw the strength. Then he nodded slowly. "It is your choice, son." The queen stepped down from her dais and walked toward Marali. She reached out and gently touched the scarred side of her face, then her cheek. "You will not wear a veil again in this house," she said. Marali said nothing. But her eyes shimmered. And for the first time since the fire she smiled. From behind her, Nuru bowed low, her task complete. And at the far side of the hall, Esina was dragged away, not like a girl wronged but like a secret finally uncovered. The banquet continued, but nothing was the same. For the bride was not the one polished and painted, but the one who had walked through fire, and brought the truth with her. She who set fire, must now walk through it. The sun rose dull and red, as though the sky itself was ashamed of what had been hidden beneath its light. Word spread swiftly, from the palace courtyards to the village paths and all the way to the elders' shrines, that a judgment must be made. Not only for the girl with the veiled face, but for the girl whose beauty had been carved from cruelty. The king summoned the council of elders from Orin. Gray-bearded, staff-carrying men and women arrived that evening, draped in the ochre and ashcloth of their office. They did not bow to royalty, for their loyalty was to truth. In their presence even queens sat still. At the heart of the palace courtyard, a pit was dug, round, shallow, and lined with sacred white stones brought from the river of beginnings. A fire was built in its center, fed not with ordinary wood, but with branches from the whispering tree, a tree that, legend said, heard the cries of every injustice and wept its own kind of flame. The ceremony was called Igba Aina, the trial of ashes. A long-forgotten custom, it was invoked only in cases where betrayal cut deeper than words, and where lies had scorched the world like a brush fire. It was a test that only the truthful could survive. Esina stood in the center of the courtyard, bound not by rope but by silence. Her head was bare. Her once lustrous hair now clung damp to her temples. The court had stripped her of her royal silks, dressing her instead in a simple wrapper, plain, colorless, without pride. Aminata was nowhere to be seen. After the exposure in the great hall, she had been taken under guard to await judgment in a separate compound. This moment belonged to Esina alone. The elders approached with the sacred item, a stone no larger than a clenched fist, smooth and clear as glass. It was the truth stone taken from the base of the Grove of Swords, where justice was said to be carved by spirit hands. One elder stepped forward, her back straight despite her age. Her voice was dry but sharp. "This is the stone that carries no opinion, no memory, no hatred, only truth. You will carry it as you walk the fire path." Two attendants stirred the pit. The flames hissed and leapt, fed by ground charcoal and powdered yam root, the traditional offerings for spirit flames. After several minutes, only glowing embers remained, a path of soft, red heat that stretched the length of 5 grown men laid head to toe. "You must walk the trial barefoot," the elder said, while holding the stone. "If it remains clear by the time you reach the end, the spirits declare you truthful. If it blackens before your journey is complete, then your lies have turned it to coal." Esina's lips trembled. She glanced toward the prince, who stood stone-faced near the elders. Near him, veiled and dignified, stood Marali, wrapped not in shame but in strength. At her side, the queen held a folded cloth of rare woven silver. Esina looked back at the fire. Her feet twitched. "No one forced you to do this," the elder reminded her. "You may choose silence. But silence is its own judgment." Esina looked down at the stone as it was placed in her palms. Felt cool, unassuming, deceptively harmless. Then barefoot she stepped forward. Her right foot met the first ember, and the hiss it gave was unlike any fire of man. Her jaw clenched. Her breath caught. One step. Two. The heat rose up her legs like invisible serpents, biting at her calves. Her arms shook. She clenched the stone. 3 steps. The court was silent. Even the drums had stopped. Only the fire spoke. 4. 5. A sound escaped her throat. She was halfway now. Her hands burned. Her soles were blistering. And the stone, oh the stone, it was growing heavier. Not by weight but by guilt. She could feel it pulse, drop, vibrate with every lie she had ever spoken, every time she laughed at Morali's quiet tears, every word of poison whispered in the shadows of the compound. Step 6. Her foot slipped. She cried out, catching herself. The stone in her hand glowed, briefly, and then turned black. Like coal. She screamed. Not from the fire beneath her feet, but from the stone that now burned her from the inside. She dropped to her knees, sobbing, arms raised. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. She was always shining even when I tried to dim her. She was never supposed to survive. The court gasped. Not for her confession, but because the stone, now lying in the ash beside her, cracked clean down the middle. 2 halves. Her lies had broken it. The prince turned away. The queen motioned to the guards. 2 of them approached and lifted Esena from the embers. Her feet were scorched, her face streaked with tears and soot, her pride utterly dismantled. She was taken, gently but firmly, away from the circle, to be dealt with by the laws of both palace and spirit. Morali did not watch her go. Her eyes remained fixed on the flames. Not in triumph, but in remembrance. The elder turned to her then. Step forward, daughter of truth. Morali did. The queen unfolded the cloth she held, a ceremonial veil of silver-threaded silk, embroidered with river patterns and flame petals. It shimmered in the light, neither flashy nor loud, but undeniably regal. This is not to hide you, the queen said as she draped it over Morali's head. This is to honor what you endured and what you carry. The veil fell gracefully, catching on her shoulders and settling like a crown. For a moment, silence claimed the courtyard again. The wind stirred the ashes, lifting a single spark skyward. The elder raised her staff. Let it be known. She who was burned has walked through fire, and not as a victim, but as witness. She is the truth that did not beg for favor. The scar that did not ask for pity. She is the bride not chosen by paints or gold, but by the eyes of fate. The crowd bowed. The prince approached, but he did not offer his hand. He offered his heart, with a bow of his head. Morali looked down once at the embers, then turned her face toward the future. When she walked down the aisle, the skies wept, not from grief but awe. The palace had never known such a wedding. It began with the drummers. Not the usual court ensemble, but elders from far villages, men and women with ash-stained drums and river-painted faces. Their rhythms were older than kingdoms, their beats echoing across the hills, summoning people from every corner of the realm. News had already spread like wildfire. The scarred girl had been chosen, not in pity but in power. Whispers turned to stories. Stories turned to songs. And by the time the first guests arrived, the palace gates swelled with villagers, nobles, spirit priests, merchants and wandering poets, all eager to witness the wedding of rain and flame. The queen herself oversaw the preparations. No silks flown in from the northern empire. No feathered fans imported from desert traders. Everything used for the wedding was drawn from their land, woven with intention and meaning. The aisle was strewn not with petals but with palm fronds and river stones. The pillars were wrapped in dried lavender and orange hibiscus, plants believed to calm storms and invite ancestral blessings. The canopy beneath which the couple would wed was stitched from bark cloth dyed in soft gray and crimson. Flame and ash. Loss and rebirth. And when the people saw the bride, many wept before she even reached the dais. Morali wore no gold. Her gown was of deep red, handspun by weavers from her own village, the same women who had once ignored her presence. The dress hugged her lightly, allowing her to move with grace but strength. Her veil, the ceremonial silver given by the queen, shimmered like morning dew over glowing embers. It fell past her waist, carried gently by the wind. As she walked through the palace courtyard, a hush fell. Even children went quiet. It was not the silence of fear, but reverence. Above them, clouds had begun to gather. Slow, low and dark, not with threat but with promise. The sky too seemed to bow. No one noticed the prince at first. He waited at the altar, clothed in a robe the color of wet clay, embroidered not with serpents or lions, but with phoenixes, birds reborn from flame. His eyes never left Morali. Not when she stepped forward. Not when she passed the crowd. Not even when the first raindrop landed on the back of her hand. The priests began the wedding rites in the old tongue, their voices deep and rhythmic. They spoke of fire, of trial, of the strength found only in those who are tested without mercy and still choose kindness. They spoke of veils, not as concealment but as transformation. When the time came, the prince stepped forward. He reached for her veil with both hands. and slowly, reverently lifted it. The rain fell harder now, not in violence but in quiet blessing. Morali's face was exposed. The scar on her cheek gleamed beneath the falling water. One eye was still slightly swollen, and the corner of her lip bore the pale reminder of the fire. But no one flinched. No one looked away. She did not smile immediately. She simply met the prince's gaze. And in that gaze something cracked open. She smiled. It was not wide or boastful, it was soft, full of breath. A smile born not from triumph over others, but reunion with herself. The queen wept silently. The prince reached for her hand and she gave it. Their palms met like day meeting dusk, two halves of a whole. The high priest declared them joined not just in name or duty but in essence. At that moment, lightning flashed far beyond the hills. The people cheered, not in wildness, but with the kind of joy that knows the price of sorrow. Far away, in a barren clearing near the borderlands, two figures walked under cloaks of mud-colored cloth. Esena and Aminata. Stripped of name. Stripped of history. Sent into exile not to be punished but to be forgotten. No one sang for them. No one remembered. But the girl they tried to burn, her name was sung from rooftops. Marali. The children chanted as they danced around makeshift wedding shrines. She rose from the ashes. Marali, the griots sang in the marketplace. She walked through fire and taught it how to forgive. And at the palace, beneath the still weeping sky, the new princess stood beside her prince, her face bare, her scars open, and her heart whole. The final words of the ceremony were hers alone. She stepped forward, lifting her face to the rain, letting it streak across her skin, cool and slow, like the balm of memory. Then she spoke. "Let them remember," she said, voice strong and steady, "not the burn, but the girl who rose from it." The sky rumbled. The fire pit behind the altar hissed softly as raindrops kissed its surface. And from that day forward, no bride ever entered the palace again without touching the edge of Morali's veil, not for luck, but to remember the cost of truth and the power of rising. Every year, a girl lays flowers at the palace gate, and wonders what face the prince would have kissed. She wears a scarf now. Not out of faith or tradition but to hide what time has done. The fine silk gloves she wears do not cover the burns on her palms. Burns not from fire, but from the memory of walking through it and failing. Esena is a name few remember. In villages where her laughter once echoed like bells, people now speak of her as they might a shadow, faint, blurred, and barely believed. Children tell stories of a faceless woman who comes to the river at dusk, whispering to the water. She holds out her hands as if hoping the current will take her guilt. She leaves offerings made from broken bracelets and melted wax. No one sees her face. No one dares to. And yet she returns each year on the anniversary. To the palace. Never beyond the gates. She lays a bouquet of flame lilies, freshly picked, never spoken for. No one sees her come. No one sees her go. But the flowers appear, always at sunrise, always at the same spot where she once stood waiting for a crown that was never hers. Inside those palace walls, the girl she tried to erase has become a name sung in classrooms and scribed into stone. Queen Marali of Flame and Rain. She did not rule with spectacle. She ruled with stillness. She spoke rarely in court, but when she did, ministers listened with both ears. She walked the corridors of the palace with no jewelry, no painted eyes, only the silver-threaded veil, now folded in a glass case near the entrance. Not as a memory of her wound, but as proof of what a wound cannot take. The veil had once hidden her scar. Now it revealed her legacy. Marali founded homes across the kingdom for girls like her, burned, beaten, betrayed. She walked into the darkest corners of forgotten villages, took hands too small and too scared, and offered them something most queens forget to give: a mirror that did not lie. The girls she saved grew into judges, healers, builders, storytellers. Some bore their scars proudly, others chose to cover them. But none were taught to hide in shame. Because of Marali, a new proverb began to echo across the land. A girl marked by fire may still carry light. Visitors to the palace still ask to see the veil. Mothers point to it and tell their daughters, "This is what courage looks like." And no girl, no matter how clever, no matter how beautiful, ever dares to bribe a charm woman again. Not because of fear but because they now know, fate listens. And it never forgets. As for the prince, he stands beside Marali in every gathering but never in front of her. He does not speak over her, only with her. He calls her his queen, his healer, and sometimes, when they are alone in the garden, beneath the same sky that once wept at their wedding, he calls her the girl who came back. They tried to ruin her face. But instead, they revealed her truth.